Growing up in Scotland, I learned from a young age that there are two kinds of people in this world. There are Scots and those who wish they were Scots. Now, I'm sure you have your own version of that saying, and it's just a question of filling in the blank. You fill in your particular tribe. And we all have tribes, don't we? As human beings, we're essentially tribal. We have an affinity for our own family members, our own relatives, people who are like us. It's natural, it's biological. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's good. But it can be a bad thing if not understood properly. A quick look at history of any nation, of any region will tell you that if we don't handle tribalism, that instinct to define the world as being about us and them, if we don't get that right, it can lead to heartbreak and violence and bloodshed. It wasn't much different at the time of Jesus. They really believed that there were two kinds of people in the world. There were Jews and non-Jews, literally Jewish people and everyone else. And everyone else they called Gentiles, or the Hebrew term was goyim. This was a word that meant people of the nations. There was the nation of Israel and everyone else. It was rather exclusive. But I think if we look at the scriptures, we see that this exclusive claim was actually to lead to a pretty inclusive reality. This dynamic of us and them, Jews and Gentiles, exclusivity and inclusivity is in all of the readings this weekend. But I want to look especially at the first reading from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 56. To the Jewish people, the prophet says this remarkable thing. He's talking about the temple, which was a very uniquely Jewish institution. But he says something remarkable, that in time to come, the people of the nations, the goyim, the foreigners, will come into this place and they too shall be joyful. They too shall lay down their sacrifices at the altar, because my house is a house of prayer for all peoples. Quite a prophecy. In the gospel today, or this weekend, we see Jesus interacting with a Gentile woman, a Canaanite woman, in a very bizarre interaction that's quite difficult for us to understand. As strange as it is, at the foundation of the strangeness is this us and them dynamic. And in the second reading from Paul's letter to the Romans, we see St. Paul writing to the early church in Rome, which literally was made up of us and them. It was made up of Christians who had been Jewish and Christians who had been Gentiles, members of the nations. You see, our faith is based on a belief that God chose exclusively a rather puny and insignificant nation. I mean, from a military, political, economic perspective, Israel was not that important. It just didn't figure much in the geopolitics of the age. And yet God made an exclusive covenant with that nation. God would say, you are my people, a people totally my own. You are a holy people, a chosen nation. It was very exclusive. And yet, this exclusive choice would lead to the greatest act of inclusivity in the history of the universe. That inclusivity brought about by the person of Jesus. In fact, we could say that even in the person of Jesus Christ, as we believe that salvation comes from Him, that's a rather exclusive statement. And yet the salvation He brings is for all people, and that's incredibly inclusive. I would maintain that in spite of the fact that our present culture highly values inclusivity, and it's a really good thing, our present culture devalues exclusivity. In fact, we tend to see exclusivity as a very negative thing. In spite of this, I would claim that the scriptures teach us that they too are in relationship with one another. What does this mean for us as a church? Well, through the exclusiveness of Jesus Christ and the covenant that God made with Israel, God brings a salvation that is meant for all peoples. which led to a church that since the 2nd century has been called the Catholic Church, a word that comes from a Greek word for universal, or meaning literally according to the whole. This tells us that our church is not defined by any particular nationality, any nation, any ethnicity, any particular race or language. It is for all peoples. What does this mean for us as a parish? Well, I'd like to give you some more homework this week. I'd like to invite you to think about 3 questions, to chew on 3 questions. Number 1, how do you experience the us and them dynamic in your life? What's your tribe? Who's in your tribe? Who's not in your tribe? These categories can be conscious, sometimes they're unconscious. And again, they're not necessarily bad, but it's good to know. And also, what is the disposition of our hearts towards those not in our tribes? Is it us against them? Us or them? Or is it us for them? Second question, how do you experience your membership in this parish? Do you experience it as according to the whole, in the universal sense, this new parish that we're in, Our Lady of Guadalupe? Or do you experience yourself as being a member of a tribe, a particular group of people who have worshipped in a particular building? Is that how you see yourself primarily? Or do you see yourself primarily according to the whole? Thirdly, are you willing to accept this biblical understanding of us and them, of the relationship between exclusivity and inclusivity? Because I believe we've got to accept both. If we do not embrace our exclusive identity, we will never be able to live our inclusive mission. If we do not believe that we are God's people, that we are chosen uniquely and exclusively, we will never be able to live that great mission of inclusion. If you, each of you, don't believe that you are called, that you are gifted, that you are chosen exclusively, uniquely, if you don't believe this, you're not going to live out His mission, His great mission of inclusion, so that all peoples in this part of Dartmouth, so that all peoples may come joyfully to the house of the Lord, that all peoples, in spite of their race and nationality, tribe or tongue, may come and lay their sacrifice at the altar, so that all peoples may know that the Lord's house is truly a house of prayer for all people. God bless you.